Greetings, I'm the man behind the mask, and I would like to talk to you about hockey. Yes, let's talk about hockey, the show that journeys through the history of the sport of ice hockey from its disputed origins to the game we see today. When we left off, the NHL had just expanded to include 6 new teams for the 1967-68 season.
Known as the Expansion Six, the Los Angeles Kings, the Minnesota North Stars, the St. Louis Blues, the Philadelphia Flyers, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Oakland Seals would form the NHL's new West Division, while the original 6 teams would form the East Division. With the NHL once again split into divisions, the league introduced a new trophy named after the NHL president Clarence Campbell to be awarded to the regular season champion of the West Division, while the Prince of Wales Trophy, previously awarded to the league's regular season champion, would now be awarded to the regular season champion of the East Division. These trophies would be won by Philadelphia and Montreal respectively at the conclusion of this first season under the new format. By season's end, there would also be a new individual award to present. On January 13, 1968, Minnesota center Bill Masterton received a hard body check from 2 Oakland defensemen and was flipped backwards, landing hard on his head. The resulting brain injury from this hit would kill Masterton within 30 hours, and his death would accelerate the movement towards wearing helmets in the NHL. To commemorate Masterton following his death, the league began the annual presentation of the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy to the player who best exemplifies the qualities of perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey. The first recipient of this award was Montreal's Claude Provost, one of the unsung heroes of the Canadiens' string of championships in the 50s and 60s. The following year, in 1968-69, the single-season marks for goals, assists, and points would be shattered by the Chicago Blackhawks' Bobby Hull and the Boston Bruins' Phil Esposito. Hull's 58 goals would be the only bright spot in Chicago's season, as they finished last in their division. However, Esposito's 77 assists and 126 points would be put to better use as Boston finished the season ranked second in their division for their first playoff berth in 10 years. But by the next season, Esposito's assist record would be broken by his teammate Bobby Orr, who tallied 87 assists in 1969-70 and not only became the first NHL defenseman to score 100 points in a season, but also the first NHL defenseman to win the scoring title, when his 120 points earned him the Art Ross Trophy, as well as the Hart Trophy and his 3rd straight Norris Trophy. The end of this season, though, would not come without a black spot. After the 1969-70 season was over, New York Rangers goaltender Terry Sawchuk and his teammate Ron Stewart, both of whom had been drinking, argued over expenses for the house they rented together on Long Island, New York. Sawchuk suffered severe internal injuries during the scuffle from falling on top of Stewart's bent knee. After being rushed to the hospital, Sawchuk's gallbladder was removed and he had a second operation on his damaged and bleeding liver. Unfortunately, he never recovered and died shortly thereafter from a pulmonary embolism on May 31, 1970, at the age of 40, leaving behind a legacy that included a record 447 wins and 103 shutouts over his 21-year career. For the 1970-71 season, the NHL welcomed 2 new teams to the league, the Buffalo Sabres and the Vancouver Canucks. Both teams were placed in the East Division, while the Chicago Blackhawks were moved to the West Division to balance things out. In addition to the new clubs, the Oakland Seals franchise underwent an alteration when they changed their name to the California Golden Seals. Though there were some new teams to the league, the one team most people talked about this season was the Boston Bruins. Led by Phil Esposito's record-breaking 76 goals and 152 points, as well as Bobby Orr's new record of 102 assists, the Bruins boasted the league's top 4 scorers and 7 of the top 10 scorers, finishing on top of the NHL at the end of the regular season with a 57-14-7 record.
Though the first attempt to form a players' association had failed in the 1950s, the second attempt would succeed when the National Hockey League Players Association was formed in June of 1967. And while voting for the Hart Trophy, symbolic of the NHL's most valuable player, remained with the members of the Professional Hockey Writers Association,
the new Lester B. Pearson Award would go to the NHL player that the rest of the players voted to be the most valuable in the league. First presented at the close of the 1970-71 season, the first player to be honored with this award was Boston's Phil Esposito. In 1971-72, the Bruins continued their dominance with the help of goaltender Jerry Cheever's record-breaking unbeaten streak of 32 games, where he went 24-0-8, allowing the Big Bad Bruins to finish first in the league once again. But in 1972-73, Cheevers, as well as a number of other NHL stars, including Andre Lacroix, J.C. Tremblay, and even Chicago's Golden Jet Bobby Hull, jumped to the new upstart league, the World Hockey Association. This would be the beginning of a fierce rivalry between the NHL and WHA that would last for the next 7 years. Despite losing players to the WHA, the NHL still continued to expand, adding the Atlanta Flames to the West Division and the New York Islanders to the East Division at the start of the 1972-73 season. The following year, the NHL would experience more losses, while the WHA gained. The NHL would lose Montreal goaltender Kedden Dryden to a 1-year retirement so he could act as a law clerk in order to earn his law degree. Then another star, Mark Tardif, would leave the league to sign a high-priced deal within the rival WHA. Then, to make matters worse, on February 21, 1974, the 24-year veteran defenseman Tim Horton, a major component to the Toronto dynasty of the 1960s, was killed in a tragic car accident. On the WHA's side of things, they not only got Mark Tardif to join their league, but also convinced NHL legend Gordie Howe to come out of retirement at the age of 46 to play in the league on the same team as his sons Mark and Marty. But not all was bad for the NHL this year. Goaltender Bernie Parent would return to the NHL from the WHA, join the Philadelphia Flyers, win a record 47 games, and end the season tied for the lowest goals against average in the league, earning him a Vezina trophy that he shared with Chicago goalie Tony Esposito, whom Parent had tied with for the lowest goals against average. In addition to Parent's shared Vezina, Philadelphia's coach Fred Sherrow took home the new Jack Adams Award for the NHL's Coach of the Year.
The next 5 seasons in the NHL would be a turbulent time, with team additions and changes, league restructuring, new awards being presented, and new records being made.
First, in the 1974-75 season, the Kansas City Scouts and the Washington Capitals became the 2 newest members to the NHL. Now a league of 18 teams, the clubs were realigned into 2 conferences, each with 2 divisions within them, the Patrick and Smythe divisions in the Campbell Conference, and the Norris and Adams divisions in the Wales Conference. One other change that came this year was the league making its 4th extension to the length of the season in 7 years. Starting with the league expansion in 1967-68, the season was extended to 74 games, and after further extending it to 76 games in 1968-69, and then to 78 games in 1970-71, it was extended to 80 games in 1974-75. The following year, the long-standing record of scoring 8 points in a game, held by Montreal's Maurice Richard and Bert Olmsted, would finally be topped, when on February 7, 1976, Toronto's Darryl Sittler tallied 6 goals and 4 assists against Boston for a new record of 10 points within a single game. The changes continued to come in the 1976-77 season, with the relocation of 2 of the league's clubs. First, the struggling California Golden Seals club packed their bags and moved to Cleveland to become the Cleveland Barons. Next, another financially burdened club, the Kansas City Scouts, relocated to Colorado, becoming the Colorado Rockies. Like the previous year, the 1976-77 season would have league records broken, when the Montreal Canadiens team that took to the ice this year finished out the regular season with an amazing 68-12 record, setting new all-time marks for victories, road victories, points, and the longest home undefeated streak, which lasted for 34 games. The next record to be broken would come the next season in 1977-78, when the New York Islanders right winger Mike Bossy scored 53 goals in his first NHL season, besting the old record for goals scored by a rookie by 9. Earlier on that season, the NHL presidency was passed on for the third time, when Clarence Campbell retired after 31 years as league president, and former alternate governor for the Detroit Red Wings, John Ziegler, was installed as the new league president. Additionally, the newest individual award, the Frank J. Selke Trophy, found its way into the NHL trophy case this year. Named after the former manager of the Montreal Canadiens, this new trophy to honor the league's best defensive forward was first presented to the Canadiens' hard-checking defensive-minded left winger, Bob Gainey. The end of this season also signaled the end of the Cleveland Barons Club. After finishing last in their division for both of the years the club was in Cleveland and on the verge of folding, the NHL granted approval for the Barons to merge with another financially troubled team, the Minnesota North Stars. The merged franchise would retain the Minnesota North Stars name, but assume the Barons' place in the Adams division for the 1978-79 season. Returning to the trail of the Stanley Cup, the late 60s and all of the 70s would fall under the dominance of three teams: the Montreal Canadiens, the Boston Bruins, and the Philadelphia Flyers.
With the expansion of the league to 12 teams, the NHL also decided to expand the length of the playoffs for the 1967-68 season, adding a best-of-7 quarterfinals round to the playoff format.
Under this new three-round format, the 1960s would close out with a pair of Montreal championships, when the Canadiens swept the St. Louis Blues once in 1968 and then again in 1969. In 1970, the Blues made it to the finals for the third straight year. This time, though, their opponent would be the Big Bad Bruins from Boston. Up 3-0, Boston looked to close out the series with a Game 4 win. With the teams tied at 3, the game headed into overtime, where 40 seconds in, Boston defenseman Bobby Orr scored probably the most famous goal in hockey history, giving Boston a clean sweep of the Blues and their first Stanley Cup since 1941. The next year, coming off a record-breaking regular season, the Bruins were riding high going into the opening round of the playoffs against the Montreal Canadiens. However, the hockey world would be left shocked when the Canadiens, behind their untested young goaltender Ken Dryden, who had only ever played in 6 NHL games, beat Boston in 7 games, pulling off one of the biggest upsets in league history. Montreal moved on to beat Minnesota and then Chicago for the 1971 Stanley Cup title, with Dryden winning the Conn Smythe Trophy as the playoff MVP. And the following year, when Dryden played in his first full NHL season, he was presented with the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Year, making him the only player to ever win the award for playoff MVP before winning the award for Rookie of the Year. But despite Dryden's success, the Canadiens lost in the opening round of the 1972 playoffs to the New York Rangers. Behind the goal-a-game line of Vic Hadfield, Rod Gilbert, and Jean Rattel, as well as defensemen Brad Park and goaltenders Ed Jacquemin and Gilles Vellemire, the Rangers would make it past Chicago and move on to play Boston in the finals. But when faced with Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito, Johnny Busick, and Jerry Cheevers, the Rangers were not able to prevail. Boston would win the series and the Cup in 6 games, and Bobby Orr would become the first player to win multiple Conn Smythe trophies when he was named the 1972 playoff MVP. Though Boston would lose in the first round of the 1973 playoffs, in 1974 they made it back to the finals, this time to face the Philadelphia Flyers. And so the match between the Big Bad Bruins and the Broad Street Bullies commenced. But behind Captain Bobby Clarke, tough man David Schultz, and goaltender Bernie Parent, the Flyers were just too much for the Bruins to handle, and Philadelphia became the first of the expansion teams to win the Stanley Cup, with MVP honors going to their goaltender Bernie Parent. The following year, the road to the Stanley Cup got a little longer when the league added a best-of-3 preliminary round to the playoff schedule. Philadelphia, however, was ready for the challenge, making it to the semifinals round where they went up 3-0 against the New York Islanders and were only one win away from returning to the finals to defend their title. The Islanders, however, had been in this position before in the previous round of the playoffs against Pittsburgh, where they were able to come back from a 3-0 series deficit to beat the Penguins in 7 games. Once again, the Islanders showed their resiliency and won the next 3 games to force a Game 7. This time, though, the Islanders couldn't pull off the miracle comeback as the Flyers took Game 7 by a score of 4-1 and moved on to beat the Buffalo Sabres in 6 games to repeat as Stanley Cup champions. Along with a second straight cup, Philadelphia goaltender Bernie Parent also earned a second straight Conn Smythe Trophy, becoming the first player and only goaltender ever to win this trophy in consecutive years. In 1976, the Flyers found themselves in the Stanley Cup Finals for the 3rd year in a row, this time facing off against Montreal. Because these two teams' style of play seemed to be on the opposite end of the spectrum, this matchup between the Flying Frenchmen of Montreal and the Broad Street Bullies of Philadelphia was viewed as a battle of good versus evil NHL style. This time around, good won the day as Montreal swept Philadelphia to claim the 1976 Stanley Cup. Led by stars like Guy Lafleur, Larry Robinson, Bob Gainey, and their ever-solid goalie Ken Dryden, the Canadiens would repeat their performance not once, not twice, but 3 more times, giving them 4 straight Stanley Cup titles and 10 total Stanley Cup titles over 15 years. The last championship to this powerful dynasty came in 1979, when the Canadiens held off the Rangers' Mafia line of Phil Esposito, Don Murdoch, and Don Malone, as well as their pair of Swedes, Anders Hedberg and Ulf Nilsson, to beat New York in 5 games. After which, their all-star goaltender Ken Dryden decided to retire during the peak of his career at the age of 31, having won 5 Vezina trophies and 6 Stanley Cups in only 8 NHL seasons. Following the close of the 1978-79 season, the NHL expanded one more time, welcoming 4 new teams to the league, bringing with them a new wave of talent for the 1980s.